The morning sun barely peeked through the clouds as Miguel pulled his old Honda Civic into the parking lot. The car made a funny noise these days, somewhere between a squeak and a groan, but it got him where he needed to go. And today, like every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the past 2 years, it brought him to Stellar Tech. Miguel checked his watch, 11:45 a.m. Perfect timing. He grabbed the stack of food containers from his passenger seat and headed toward the glass building that seemed to touch the sky. The weight of the containers made his arms ache, but he was used to it by now. From the outside, Stellar Tech looked impressive. All glass and steel, with fancy art in the lobby and people walking around in expensive clothes. Miguel noticed these things. He noticed how some of them looked right through him too, as if he were invisible. Just another delivery guy. Package for the marketing team meeting, Miguel told the front desk lady. She barely looked up from her computer as she waved him toward the elevator. 14th floor. You know the way. He did know the way. He'd been delivering here long enough to know which elevator was fastest, the middle one, and which floor had the best bathroom if he needed a quick break, the 9th. Little things you learn when you spend your days going in and out of buildings that aren't yours. Inside the elevator, Miguel fixed his collar and tried to smooth down his hair. The doors opened to the 14th floor, and he stepped into the busy office. People rushed around with coffee cups and laptops, talking about things like quarterly projections and user interfaces. As he walked toward the conference room, Miguel overheard two guys in suits. "The app needs to be more user-friendly," one said. "My mom couldn't figure out how to use it, and she's our target demographic." Miguel smiled to himself. He could fix that. Last night, he'd stayed up until 2 a.m. working on a similar problem in his coding class. The solution wasn't even that complicated, just a matter of simplifying the navigation flow. The conference room had a long table surrounded by important-looking people. Miguel quietly set up the food containers along the side table, arranging them neatly with napkins and utensils. "Just put the drinks over there," a woman said without looking at him. She was pointing to a small table in the corner while continuing her conversation with a colleague. Miguel did as he was told. As he arranged the drinks, he couldn't help but listen to their meeting. They were talking about a problem with their software, something about data loading too slowly. Again, Miguel thought about solutions. He'd just learned about database optimization in his online class. When he finished setting up, nobody said thank you. Only one guy, an older man with kind eyes, nodded at him as he left. Miguel nodded back. Back in his car, Miguel pulled out his phone and made a quick note about the database problem and his ideas for fixing it. Then he checked his delivery app. 3 more stops before his lunch break. During that break, instead of scrolling through social media like his co-workers, Miguel pulled out his laptop in the back seat of his car. The Wi-Fi from the coffee shop next door was just strong enough to let him connect to his coding class website. 20 minutes of study time was better than nothing. That night, after finishing his delivery shifts, Miguel sat at his small desk in the corner of his studio apartment. His eyes were heavy with tiredness, but he opened his laptop anyway. On the screen was the coding project he'd been working on for weeks, a simple app that solved the exact problem he'd heard about at Stellar Tech today. One day, he whispered to himself as his fingers moved across the keyboard. The blue light of the screen highlighted the determination in his eyes. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, reminding him that dreams could come true in this place, even for a delivery guy who some people didn't bother to see. What they didn't know was that Miguel saw everything, and one day they would see him too. Rain pounded against the windows of Miguel's car as he pulled into Stellar Tech's parking lot. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting against the downpour. Just his luck, a huge catering order on the worst weather day of the month. "Please don't slip," Miguel whispered to himself as he carefully balanced 3 large trays of food from the back seat. His shoes were already soaked, and water dripped from his baseball cap onto his nose. He hadn't been able to afford a new raincoat after his old one tore last winter. The security guard at the front desk actually smiled today. "Need help with that?" he asked, noticing Miguel struggling with the weight. "I got it, thanks," Miguel replied, though his arms were beginning to shake. The guard pressed the elevator button for him, a small kindness that made a difference. Today's delivery was for the executive floor, the big bosses with the corner offices and fancy chairs. Miguel had only been up there a few times. Most days, the executives had their assistants come down to collect food, but this was a special meeting with investors, according to his delivery notes. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway with actual artwork on the walls, not the motivational posters on the lower floors, but real paintings. The carpet here was thicker too, with no coffee stains. Miguel followed the sound of voices to a large conference room with glass walls. A woman wearing an expensive-looking suit gestured for him to come in. Finally, she said, checking her watch. "Set up at the side table, please. They'll be here in 20 minutes. "Yes, ma'am," Miguel said, carefully arranging everything. The food was from an upscale restaurant, tiny sandwiches with ingredients he couldn't pronounce and colorful desserts that probably cost more than what he made in an hour. As he worked, 2 men entered the room. They wore matching blue suits and had that confident walk that comes with power. Miguel recognized one of them, a guy who often appeared in company photos in the lobby, some kind of manager. The men stood near the window, coffee cups in hand, talking as if Miguel wasn't there. Maybe they really didn't see him, or maybe they just didn't care. "The coding bootcamp applications are up this year," the taller one said. "But half these kids won't make it. They think a few online courses will turn them into programmers." Miguel's ears perked up as he arranged the desserts. He was taking those exact online courses. "Did you see that delivery guy last week?" The other man said, lowering his voice but not enough. "Reading Python for beginners during his lunch break." The taller man laughed. "Probably thinks he'll be working here someday." "Some people just don't understand their place," the other replied, shaking his head. "Not everyone is cut out for tech. My kid could learn that Python stuff in a weekend, but actually building meaningful applications takes real talent." Miguel's hands froze over the food tray. His face burned hot despite the air conditioning blasting overhead. They were talking about him. They had seen him studying and turned it into a joke. He wanted to say something, to tell them he completed 3 coding certificates already, that he stayed up studying while they were sleeping, that he could solve problems they hadn't even considered. But he said nothing. The steady paycheck from his delivery job paid his rent and his mother's medicine back home. "All set up," Miguel said quietly, stepping back from the table. Neither man acknowledged him as he left. That evening, rain still pounding against his apartment window, Miguel sat at his desk. His damp delivery uniform hung in the bathroom. His muscles ached from carrying trays all day. He should sleep. His shift started at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Instead, he opened his laptop. The screen illuminated his tired face as he logged into his coding course. The current challenge involved creating a logistics application, ironically, something that could make delivery routes more efficient. "Watch me," he whispered to his reflection in the screen, thinking of those laughing men. "Just watch me." He coded until his eyes burned, fueled by something stronger than exhaustion. Not anger exactly, but determination. The kind that changes lives. The kind they hadn't counted on when they dismissed the delivery guy without a second thought. 3 months passed since that rainy day. Miguel had kept his head down, continuing his deliveries to Stellar Tech while spending every spare minute on his coding projects. His eyes had permanent dark circles now, but his skills were growing faster than even he expected. It was a quiet Thursday when fate stepped in. Miguel had a small stack of mail for Stellar Tech's HR department, mostly boring envelopes except for one large package that required a signature. "You'll need to wait a minute," the HR lady told him. "The person who needs to sign is in a meeting." Miguel nodded and stepped back, leaning against the wall of the HR lobby. That's when he saw it. A bright yellow flyer pinned to the bulletin board. "Stellar Technologies," it announced in bold letters. "Open to the public, $5,000 prize. Potential internship opportunity." His heart skipped. Public meant anyone could join, even a delivery guy. "The person is coming now," the HR lady called. Miguel quickly snapped a photo of the flyer with his phone before completing his delivery. Back in his car, he read the details. The hackathon would happen in 2 weeks. Participants would have 48 hours to build a working application that solved a real business problem. The winner would get cash and possibly an internship at Stellar Tech. That night, Miguel didn't sleep. Ideas raced through his mind. As a delivery person, he saw things others didn't. He noticed how packages got lost between departments. He saw which processes wasted time. He understood the flow of information and materials in a way that the people sitting at desks couldn't. For the next 2 weeks, Miguel worked double shifts to save money. He would need to take the hackathon weekend off, which meant no pay for those days. His supervisor wasn't happy. "You're my most reliable guy," his boss complained. "What's so important about this weekend?" "It could change my life," Miguel answered simply. The night before the hackathon, Miguel sat in his tiny apartment surrounded by notebooks filled with ideas and sketches. He'd settled on building an app that would fix the most obvious problem he'd seen at Stellar Tech: their terrible system for tracking interdepartment deliveries and requests. His app would be simple but powerful. Employees could scan a QR code to track any physical item moving through the building. No more lost packages, no more confusion about which department had requested what, no more wasted time searching for misplaced documents. Miguel barely slept. The alarm rang at 6 a.m., and he stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Today, he would enter Stellar Tech not through the service entrance but through the front door. Not as someone invisible, but as a competitor. His hands trembled as he put on his only button-up shirt. It was slightly wrinkled despite his best efforts with the iron. His jeans were clean but faded. He couldn't afford new clothes, but he polished his old shoes until they shined. The Stellar Tech lobby buzzed with excitement when he arrived. Tables had been set up with power strips and monitors. About 50 people milled around, mostly young programmers in hoodies with laptop stickers. Some wore shirts from prestigious universities. Others represented local tech companies. Miguel clutched his laptop bag. The computer inside was second-hand, upgraded with money he'd saved over months. He approached the registration table, his mouth dry. "Name?" asked the woman with the clipboard. "Miguel Reyes." She scanned her list. I don't see you on the employee list." "I'm not an employee. The flyer said it was open to the public." "Oh." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "That's right. Public participants are on the second page." As she checked him in, Miguel felt eyes on him. He looked up to see the two managers from that rainy day, the ones who had laughed at his ambitions. They were serving as judges, their names displayed on a large board by the entrance. They didn't recognize him without his delivery uniform. But they would. Soon. Miguel found an empty table in the corner and set up his laptop. Around him, people chatted about frameworks and APIs. He took a deep breath and opened his notebook of ideas. "Participants," announced a voice over the speakers. "The hackathon begins in 5 minutes. Get ready to create something amazing." Miguel's fingers hovered over his keyboard. He was ready. The giant digital clock on the wall hit 0, and the room erupted in a flurry of keyboard clicks. The hackathon had officially begun. Miguel took a deep breath and opened his coding software. Around him, other participants were already deep in conversation, forming teams and sketching ideas on whiteboards. He noticed how some people knew each other, laughing and sharing snacks as they worked. He had no team, no connections, just his laptop and the knowledge gained from countless hours of study and observation. "First-timer?" asked a friendly voice. Miguel looked up to see a young woman with bright purple hair at the next table. She wore a t-shirt from a local coding bootcamp. "Is it that obvious?" Miguel smiled nervously. "You've got that deer-in-headlights look," she said. "I had it last year too. I'm flying solo this time. My team bailed last minute. You?" "Same. Well, minus the team part. I've always been solo," Miguel replied. "Good luck then," she said with a thumbs up. "May the code be with you." The morning passed in a blur of concentration. Miguel's fingers flew across the keyboard as he built the framework for his app. His years of delivery experience guided every feature. He knew exactly what users would need because he'd seen the problems firsthand. By lunchtime, volunteers brought in pizza. Miguel barely noticed, taking just a few bites before returning to his screen. He couldn't waste a minute. The other participants had better equipment, more education, and probably more sleep than his 4 hours the night before. Afternoon turned to evening. Some participants napped under tables or on beanbags in the corner. Others paced the room, talking through problems out loud. Energy drinks and coffee cups piled up everywhere. Around midnight, one of the managers, the taller one who had mocked him months ago, walked through the room, observing progress. He stopped at several tables, nodding and asking questions. When he reached Miguel, he glanced at the screen with mild interest. "Delivery tracking system?" he asked, not recognizing Miguel in this context. "Yes," Miguel replied, his heart pounding. "For internal company use. It solves the problem of lost packages and documents between departments." The manager squinted at the screen. "Interesting approach. Simple interface." "The simplest interfaces often work best," Miguel said. "I found that in my experience." The manager nodded and moved on, already forgetting the conversation. But Miguel felt a small victory. He'd spoken to this man as an equal, not as someone invisible. The night stretched on. At 3 a.m., Miguel hit a wall. His code wouldn't compile properly. A bug somewhere was breaking the entire tracking function. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, and doubt crept in. Maybe he wasn't ready for this. Maybe those managers had been right. He stepped outside for fresh air. The night was cool and quiet, stars barely visible above the city lights. In the parking lot, he recognized his usual delivery spot, where he parked his car 3 times a week. How strange to be here as something other than the delivery guy. That thought gave him clarity. He wasn't just a coder tonight. He was both the delivery guy and the coder. His advantage was seeing both sides. Miguel rushed back in, attacked the problem from a new angle, and fixed the bug by sunrise. As morning light filled the room, he added the final touches to his app. Features no one had asked for, but that he knew would make all the difference. Like notifications that adapted to each department's needs, and a simple way for non-tech people to track their requests. By Sunday afternoon, with just hours left, exhaustion had claimed many participants. Some had given up entirely, slumped in chairs playing on their phones. Others frantically tried to fix last-minute issues. Miguel, running on nothing but determination and vending machine coffee, felt strangely calm as he tested his completed app one final time. It wasn't flashy. It wouldn't impress with fancy graphics, but it would solve real problems that he'd watched real people struggle with every day. The final countdown began. 10 minutes left to submit. "You got this," said the purple-haired woman as she frantically typed at her own computer. Miguel nodded, too tired to speak, and pressed the submit button. Now came the hardest part, presenting his creation to the very people who thought he didn't belong. The presentation room felt too cold and too hot at the same time. Miguel sat in the back row, waiting for his turn to show his work. 10 finalists had been selected from all the hackathon participants, and somehow he was one of them. Next up, Miguel Reyes, called the event coordinator. Walking to the front of the room felt like moving through water. Every step took effort. He hadn't slept properly in days. His shirt was wrinkled from the 2 nights spent at his workstation, but none of that mattered now. Miguel connected his laptop to the projector. The screen came to life, showing his simple but clean app interface. He turned to face the judges, 5 people seated at a long table. Among them were the 2 managers who had laughed at him months ago. "Good afternoon," Miguel began, his voice steadier than he expected. "I created a solution for internal delivery tracking. It might not look fancy, but it solves real problems I've seen firsthand." He clicked through the app, showing how packages could be scanned and tracked throughout the building, how employees could check the status of their requests without making phone calls, how managers could see where bottlenecks happened. "The current system fails because it was designed by people who never actually deliver anything," Miguel explained. "They didn't consider that delivery personnel often can't find the right person to hand packages to. They didn't think about how hard it is to track something when departments rename it differently in their systems." As Miguel spoke, he noticed a look of confusion spreading across the faces of the 2 managers. They were squinting at him, trying to place where they'd seen him before. "My solution is simple because simplicity works best when you're busy carrying packages and trying to get signatures on a tight schedule," Miguel continued. "And I know this because..." He paused, looking directly at the 2 managers. "I deliver to this building 3 times a week. I'm the guy you see with the packages and lunch orders. The one reading coding books during lunch breaks." The recognition hit them like a physical force. Their eyes widened, and one of them actually dropped his pen. The taller manager's face flushed red. The beauty of this app is that it bridges the gap between the people making things happen on the ground and the people making decisions in corner offices, Miguel said, finding confidence in their shock. Because sometimes the best ideas come from places you least expect. When he finished his presentation, the room fell silent. Then the woman with purple hair from the neighboring table started clapping. Others joined in. The applause grew until it filled the room. The judges huddled together, whispering. The two managers kept glancing at Miguel, their expressions unreadable. After the final presentation, everyone gathered in the main area for the results. Miguel stood by himself, too nervous to beat the celebratory snacks laid out on tables. The CEO of Stellar Tech, a woman Miguel had seen in company photos but never in person, stepped up to the microphone. Before we announce the winners, I want to thank everyone who participated. True innovation comes from diverse perspectives, and we've seen incredible creativity this weekend. She announced the third-place winner, a team of university students who'd built a customer service chatbot. Second place went to a developer from another tech company who'd created a data visualization tool. And our first-place winner, she said, pausing for effect, is Miguel Reyes, with his internal delivery tracking system. The room erupted in applause again. Miguel couldn't move. Was this really happening? The CEO continued, Miguel's solution stood out not just for its technical merit, but for his deep understanding of the problem. Sometimes it takes someone with a different perspective to see what we've been missing. As Miguel walked up to accept his prize, a trophy and an envelope containing a check, he caught the eye of the taller manager. The man looked away first, unable to hold his gaze. The CEO shook Miguel's hand firmly. I'd like to speak with you privately after this, she said quietly. I think we have a lot to discuss about your future. Miguel nodded, unable to find words. From the back of the room, the purple-haired woman gave him a thumbs up. In that moment, standing on stage with a trophy in his hands, Miguel was no longer just the delivery guy. He was a problem solver, an innovator, and possibly, very soon, an employee of Stellar Tech. The very same company where people had laughed at his dreams. The internship offer came with a sticky note attached to the formal letter. Your perspective is exactly what we need, the CEO had written in blue ink. Welcome to the team. Miguel stayed at it for a long time before calling his mom back home. Her happy tears over the phone made everything real. His first day as an intern was strange. He walked through the same doors he'd entered countless times, but now with an employee badge clipped to his belt. The security guard did a double take. No deliveries today, he asked with a smile. Not anymore, Miguel replied. I work here now. The tech department buzzed with activity. Miguel was assigned to a small desk in the corner, nothing fancy, but it had a new computer and a chair that actually adjusted properly. His supervisor, a friendly guy with thick glasses and a constant coffee mug in hand, seemed genuinely excited to have him. We've never implemented a hackathon winners project before, he explained. But yours actually solves a real problem we've had for years. The CEO wants it rolled out company-wide within 6 months. Those 6 months flew by in a blur of coding, meetings, and learning. Miguel's app evolved as other departments provided feedback. He discovered he had a natural talent for explaining technical concepts to non-technical people, probably because he had spent so long bridging those worlds himself. What surprised him most was how many employees actually recognized him from his delivery days. You're the lunch guy, exclaimed one woman from marketing. Your app is amazing. No more lost packages. Not everyone was as welcoming. The two managers who had mocked him kept their distance, speaking to him only when necessary in meetings. Miguel didn't mind. He was too busy proving himself. When his internship ended, the HR department called him in for a meeting. Miguel's stomach knotted with worry. Would they thank him for his time and send him on his way? Instead, they offered him a full-time position with a salary that made him blink twice to make sure he'd heard correctly. It was 3 times what he'd made as a delivery driver. The CEO specifically requested you join the innovation team, the HR person explained. She thinks you have a unique way of seeing problems. That night, Miguel walked through his neighborhood with a lightness in his step. He stopped at his old apartment building, looking up at the tiny window of the studio he'd lived in while studying late into the night. Tomorrow, He would sign a lease on a new place, one with actual separate rooms and windows that didn't stick. Over the next 2 years, Miguel's career took off in ways he could never have imagined. His delivery tracking app became standard across all Stellar Tech offices. He was invited to speak at conferences about user-centered design. 3 more of his ideas were developed into company products. When a leadership position opened up in the logistics software division, Miguel applied without expecting much. He was still young, still learning, but his practical experience combined with his technical skills made him stand out among candidates with fancier degrees but less real-world understanding. "We need someone who knows both the technical side and the human side," his new boss explained when offering him the position. "You've lived in both worlds." Now Miguel had his own team, 8 developers working on solutions for tracking, shipping, and delivery problems. His office had a window overlooking the city. Sometimes he watched the delivery trucks far below, remembering the weight of packages in his arms. He made sure his team spent time watching how their software was actually used. "Get out of your chairs," he often said. "See the problems with your own eyes." His former delivery company became Stellar Tech's first client for their new logistics software. When Miguel presented the solution to them, his old supervisor couldn't believe the transformation. "You always were different," the man said, shaking his head in amazement. "Always thinking while the rest of us were just doing." The purple-haired woman from the hackathon now worked on Miguel's team. So did 3 other people who'd never had traditional paths into tech. Miguel made sure to look for talent in unexpected places. Sometimes, he told a new hire who was nervous about lacking a computer science degree, "The most valuable insights come from living in the problem, not just studying it." He never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. 5 years after that rainy day, when Miguel overheard those hurtful words in the conference room, he sat in his office reviewing the quarterly reports. His team had just launched their 3rd major product, and the numbers looked good, really good. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was his assistant. "The CEO wants to see you," she said. "Sounds important." Miguel straightened his tie, still not completely comfortable with wearing one, and headed to the top floor. The CEO's office had a view of the entire city. On clear days, you could see the mountains in the distance. "Miguel, please sit down," the CEO said, gesturing to a chair. Her hair had more gray in it than when they'd first met, but her eyes were just as sharp. "I'll get right to the point. Our chief technology officer is retiring next month. I want you to take the position." Miguel stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. "But there are more senior people," he said finally. "People with more experience, more education." "More of the same thinking we've always had," she interrupted. "You've brought something different to this company. Your teams deliver projects on time. Your products actually solve real problems. And you've built the most diverse department we have." She leaned forward. "I don't need another person with the right degree. I need someone who sees what others miss." That evening, Miguel drove home in a daze. He pulled over at a lookout point above the city and called his mother. "Mama," he said when she answered, "they want me to be the CTO." Her happy tears matched his own. The announcement went out the next morning. Most of the company celebrated. Miguel had built a reputation for being tough but fair, for listening before deciding, and for remembering the names of everyone from the janitors to the senior engineers. Not everyone was happy, of course. As Miguel walked into his first executive meeting, he could feel the stares. And there they were, the 2 managers who had mocked him years ago. They now worked under different departments, but they would soon be reporting directly to him. The taller one approached him after the meeting. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "Quite a journey from delivering our lunches." Miguel looked him in the eye. "Thank you. It certainly has been." An awkward silence hung between them. The manager cleared his throat. "Listen, about what happened back then, those comments. I want to apologize. It was unprofessional and, well, I was wrong about you." Miguel hadn't expected that. He nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." "So what happens now?" the manager asked. "I imagine you might want some personnel changes." Miguel thought about it. Revenge would be easy. But that wasn't why he was here. "What happens now is we build better products," he said simply. "And we make sure nobody else gets dismissed because of where they start from." His first act as CTO was to create a training program for service workers wanting to enter tech. Delivery drivers, janitors, cafeteria staff, people whose potential was often overlooked. They would work part-time while learning coding and design. His second act was to require all new engineers and managers to spend a week doing frontline work, making deliveries, answering customer service calls, watching how real people use their products. "You can't solve problems you don't understand," became his motto. 6 months into his new role, Miguel stood at the podium during the company's annual meeting. The auditorium was packed with employees from every level of the company. "5 years ago, I delivered packages to this building," he began. The crowd went quiet. "I was invisible to most of you, just another person in a uniform. But I saw everything, the inefficiencies, the barriers, the opportunities that everyone else missed." He looked out at the faces watching him. Some he knew from his delivery days. Others he hired himself. In the back row sat 3 people in delivery uniforms, the first participants in his new training program. "The best ideas can come from anywhere," he continued, "from anyone, sometimes from the person you least expect." When the applause died down, Miguel stepped away from the podium feeling the weight of his journey, from the kid who delivered lunch to the man who now helped steer the company's future. That night, he drove past his old delivery route one more time. Then he turned toward home, toward tomorrow, toward all the invisible people he could now help make seen.